The Devil's Heirloom. Part 1. The Curiosity. Chapter 1. The town of Ravenswood clung to the English countryside like a secret whispered in an old church. It was a place of cobbled lanes, crooked timber-framed houses, and a perpetual mist that rose from the surrounding hills, blurring the line between the mundane and the spectral. For a journalist like Emily Carter, it was a treasure trove of stories, a place where history hadn't been paved over, but had seeped into the very foundations. She was here on assignment for a regional magazine, a puff piece on the most charming towns in the Cotswolds, but Emily's ambition yearned for something with more teeth. That's how she found herself standing before curios and wonders. The shop sat at the corner of Main Street, its windows a dusty diorama of forgotten lives. Unlike the cheerful tea shops and artisan bakeries nearby, this place exuded an air of solemn importance. A small brass bell chimed a mournful welcome as she pushed the door open. The air inside was thick with the scent of aged paper, beeswax, and something else, something metallic and cold, like old coins. Shelves groaned under the weight of artifacts, tarnished silver lockets, yellowed maps of forgotten empires, and glass cases displaying things with too many legs or not enough eyes. Behind a counter cluttered with ledgers and arcane-looking instruments stood Mr. Edward Blackstone. He was as much an antique as his wares, with a face a roadmap of wrinkles and eyes that seemed to hold the reflection of countless histories. "Looking for anything in particular?" he asked, his voice a dry rustle. "Just browsing," Emily replied, her journalistic curiosity piqued. "This town is full of character." "Character," Mr. Blackstone mused, polishing a silver snuff-box with a soft cloth. "A polite word for ghosts, my dear. This town is built on them." Emily offered a non-committal smile and navigated the narrow aisles. Her eyes scanned the objects, each one humming with a potential story. But then she saw it. On a high shelf, bathed in the slanted light from a grimy window, was a music box. It wasn't large, perhaps the size of a thick novel, but it commanded her entire attention. Its body was a dark, lustrous wood, possibly ebony, and it was encased in an intricate golden filigree. The pattern wasn't merely beautiful, it was alive, depicting scenes of temptation and fall that seemed to writhe and shift as she moved closer. It felt strangely familiar, a pull in her chest that was both terrifying and irresistible. "That one," Mr. Blackstone said, suddenly beside her, "has a history that would curdle your blood." "I'm a journalist," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. "Curdled blood is my stock in trade." The old man studied her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Some stories are best left untold. Some things are better left as curiosities." He said it with a finality that was meant to be a warning. For Emily, it was a challenge. "I'll take it." As her fingers brushed the cool metal, a jolt like a tiny static electric shock ran up her arm. She ignored it, paid the exorbitant price Mr. Blackstone quoted without a second thought, and left the shop with the box cradled in her arms. She felt a profound sense of victory, as if she had just claimed a great prize. She was completely unaware that the prize had, in fact, claimed her. Chapter 2. Emily's rented cottage was on the edge of town, overlooking a mist-shrouded valley. That evening, she placed the music box on her writing desk, the focal point of the room. She'd spent the day interviewing the local vicar and the town's mayor, gathering bland quotations for her charm piece article. The music box felt like the real story. With a trembling finger, she wound the tiny key on its base. A melody began to play, so hauntingly sweet it almost hurt to hear. It was a simple tune, a lullaby she felt she knew, yet it held a discordant note, a faint, almost subliminal dissonance that grated on the nerves. The golden filigree seemed to shimmer, catching the lamplight in a way that made the tiny figures in the pattern dance. She slept fitfully that night, the melody echoing in her dreams. In them, she was running down endless, dark corridors in an opulent mansion. The music box was always just ahead of her, its song growing louder, more frantic. Behind her, a shadow pursued her, a formless, hungry thing that she could feel but not see. She woke with a gasp, her heart hammering against her ribs, the sound of the music box seeming to hang in the silent air of her bedroom for a moment before fading. The next day, the feeling of being watched began. It was a prickling sensation on the back of her neck as she made coffee, a fleeting movement in her peripheral vision as she typed. She blamed it on the isolation of the cottage, the strange atmosphere of the town. But the unease was a constant, unwelcome companion. Her phone call with her editor, Marcus, was a disaster. He was pressing her for a deadline, and she found herself snapping at him, her irritability flaring into unprofessional anger. "I just need more time, Marcus. This place it's more complex than it looks," she'd said, her tone sharper than she intended. "It's a puff piece on a twee town, Emily. Not an exposé on the mob. Get it done." The line went dead, and Emily was left with a profound sense of alienation. The music box sat on her desk, silent and inert, yet she could have sworn its golden filigree looked just a little bit sharper, a little more cruel than it had the day before. Chapter 3. A week passed in a fog of dread. Emily's sleep was a nightly battlefield of terrifying dreams, and her waking hours were consumed by the feeling of a presence in her cottage. She stopped answering calls from friends, her replies to their texts becoming increasingly brief and distant. Her carefully constructed world of ambition and connection was crumbling, leaving only her and the cursed object on her desk. Desperate, she threw herself into research. The article for Marcus was forgotten. This was the story. She drove to the county records office, then to the Ravenswood local library, a dusty, cathedral-like building run by a severe woman who seemed to disapprove of Emily's quest. The name Ashworth kept appearing, a wealthy, aristocratic family who had built a grand estate, Blackwood Manor, just outside of town in the 18th century. Their history was stained with tragedy, sudden deaths, rumors of madness, a series of scandals that had seen their name all but erased from the town's official narrative. The manor itself had burned down mysteriously a century ago. The breakthrough came in a fragile, leather-bound journal from a local physician in 1792. He wrote of treating the Ashworth family for a melancholia of a most peculiar and aggressive nature. He noted that the affliction seemed to coincide with the arrival of a new music box, a masterpiece of gilded craftsmanship commissioned by the master of the house, Lord Alistair Ashworth. The journal described the artisan who created it as a reclusive foreigner whose name was lost to history. It spoke of whispers of a pact, a dark bargain made to infuse the box with a soul. The physician's final entry was a frantic, barely legible scrawl. The melody is a key, not to beauty, but to a locked room within the mind. Inside, something waits, something that devours. They call it the Devourer. Emily stared at the words, the blood draining from her face. It wasn't just a story, it was real. The curse was real. The music box was a plague carrier, and she was its latest victim. The irrational thought, the paranoia, the isolation, it wasn't her. It was the box. The melody was the key, and it was slowly unlocking the door to her own sanity. She had to get rid of it. Part 2. The Contagion. Chapter 4. The decision was made in a panic. Emily wrapped the music box in an old scarf, her hands shaking, as if the object were burning hot. She couldn't bring herself to destroy it. A primal, inexplicable part of her still felt a possessive connection to it. Instead, she drove to a larger nearby town and sold it to a bustling antique arcade for a fraction of what she'd paid. The transaction was brisk and impersonal. As she walked away, a profound sense of relief washed over her, so potent it made her dizzy. The music box was someone else's problem now. She was free. Within a day, the shadows in her cottage seemed less menacing. The feeling of being watched receded. She called Marcus and apologized, blaming a bad case of flu. She even started working on her article again. But a guilt, cold and sharp, remained. She hadn't destroyed the evil. She had merely passed it on. The music box found a new home almost immediately. James and Sarah were celebrating. They'd just moved into their first house, a cozy semi-detached on the outskirts of Ravenswood, and they were expecting their first child. The antique arcade was a place of happy discovery for them, and the music box was the crown jewel of their finds. "It's exquisite," Sarah whispered, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. James wound the key, and the lullaby filled their living room. It was beautiful, soothing, a perfect piece for the nursery they were preparing. "It's a bit of an old-world heirloom for our little one," James said, kissing her forehead. Neither of them noticed the faint, sour note that underpinned the melody, a dissonance that promised darkness instead of dreams. Chapter 5. The change was gradual, insidious. At first, it was just a heightened sense of anxiety. James, a normally easygoing man, became preoccupied with security. He installed new locks on the doors and windows and checked them multiple times each night. He started jumping at shadows, his protectiveness of Sarah and their unborn child curdling into a tense, paranoid vigil. "Did you hear that?" he'd ask in the middle of the night, sitting bolt upright in bed. "It's just the house settling, love," Sarah would soothe, but she was less and less certain of that. For her, the terror came in the form of hallucinations. While dusting the living room, she'd see a flicker of movement in the brass knob of the music box lid, a tiny woman screaming silently. Once, passing the half-finished nursery, she saw a tall, gaunt figure standing over the empty crib, its featureless head turned in her direction. She'd blink, and it would be gone. The music box's tune, once a comfort, now seemed to follow her, its sweet melody twisting into a malicious taunt in her mind. Their conversations, once filled with excitement about the baby, became laced with fear and accusation. "You need to stop hovering, James. You're making me anxious." Chapter 6. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday night. The melody was playing, and Sarah was crying, convinced she had felt the cold touch of a phantom hand on her stomach. James, his face a mask of rage and terror, pointed a trembling finger at the mantelpiece. "It's that thing," he yelled, his voice cracking. "It's that box. It's poisoning us. It's poisoning the baby." "It's just a music box," Sarah screamed back, her own sanity fraying. "It's not. It's a cancer." In a fit of uncontrolled fury, James snatched the box from the mantelpiece. He ran out of the house, ignoring Sarah's cries, and hurled it with all his might into the large donation bin behind the local thrift store. It landed with a sickening, muffled thud. He stood there, panting in the rain, feeling a hollow victory. It was gone. He was sure of it. But curses are not so easily discarded. The box lay amidst a heap of discarded clothes and broken toys, its golden filigree dull in the pale light. A few days later, Mrs. Jenkins, a kind-hearted woman with a ready smile and a deep love for her granddaughter, was volunteering at the store. She saw the box peeking out from a pile of donated junk and mistook it for trash. "Well now, what's this pretty little thing doing here?" she murmured, pulling it free. She intended to give it to her granddaughter Lily for her 10th birthday. As her wrinkled fingers closed around the golden key, a profound and inexplicable sense of dread washed over her. The warm, bustling charity shop fell away, and she was alone, standing at the edge of an abyss. The scent of decay filled her nostrils, and a voice, no louder than a sigh, whispered a single horrible word in her ear. "Mine." She gasps and dropped the box. The shop manager, a busy teenager, barely looked up. "You okay, Mrs. J? Just leave it if you don't want it." Mrs. Jenkins wanted to run, to flee the shop and never look back. But as she looked at the beautiful, tragic object lying on the floor, a sense of responsibility, a foolish, misplaced pity stayed her hand. It was so lovely. It would be a shame for such a treasure to be thrown away. Picking it up again, her heart pounding, she wrapped it in tissue paper and bought it for a nominal price, convincing herself the dread was just her imagination. It was too late. The curse had found its most vulnerable victim yet. Part 3. The Investigation. Chapter 7. The plague spread through Ravenswood like a stain. The quaint charm the magazine had sent Emily to capture curdled into a simmering hostility. The pub, once a place of jovial gatherings, saw nightly brawls over slights, real and imagined. Neighbors who had been friends for years began to eye each other with suspicion. Vandalism, a rarity in the town, became common. Headstones in the churchyard were toppled, windows smashed, hateful graffiti scrawled on the walls of the community hall. A darkness, once confined to the walls of the music box's owner, was now leaking into the very soul of Ravenswood. Emily watched it all from the restored sanctity of her cottage, a sickening certainty coiling in her gut. She had been tracking the story, her journalistic instincts overriding her fear. A call to the antique arcade confirmed who had bought the box. A discreet inquiry at the local council office, using her press credentials, gave her the names of the couple who lived on the street where James had thrown it. A visit to the thrift store and a chat with a kindly but distracted volunteer named Mrs. Jenkins completed the chain. The elderly woman had given the music box to her granddaughter. It was now in a child's bedroom. The weight of her responsibility was crushing. Guilt was a cold stone in her stomach. She had to act. She remembered the name of the historian mentioned in an Old Town pamphlet, Dr. Alastair Finch. She found him at the Ravenswood University archive, a man who lived amongst the dead and dusty, his spectacles perched precariously on his nose. Mr. Blackstone was right, Emily said without preamble, laying out her story. The Ashworth music box, the curse, it's real, and it's destroying this town. Dr. Finch listened, his initial skepticism slowly hardening into a grim belief as Emily recounted her research and the box's journey. He had seen the historical records of the Ashworth family's decline, the whispers of a demon in a music box he had always dismissed as folklore. "The entity," Finch said, his voice low, tapping a dusty tome. The physician's journal called it the Devourer. These pacts were not uncommon in that era. An artisan trades his soul, or a piece of it, for genius. The entity provides the artistry, but imbues the work with a piece of its own malevolent nature. It feeds on emotional turmoil, on chaos. It's a psychic vampire. "Then how do we kill it?" Emily asked, her voice desperate. "We can't," a new voice said. They both turned to see a woman standing in the doorway. She was in her late 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of no-nonsense practicality. She held a leather case containing various electronic devices. "Dr. Finch, I'm Lena Vance. You called me about a paranormal disturbance." Finch had called her days ago, before Emily had arrived, concerned about the rising unrest in town. He had assumed it was a localized haunting. Lena Vance was a paranormal investigator, and she was exactly what they needed. Chapter 8. Lena Vance's skepticism evaporated the moment she stepped into Mrs. Jenkins's home. The air was thick, frigid, and her EMF meter screamed, its needle jumping into the red. Lily, the granddaughter, was staying with her parents, complaining of nightmares and a mean shadow man in her room. Mrs. Jenkins herself was a wreck, pale and gaunt, with the haunted look of someone who had stared into an abyss. "It's in the girl's room," the old woman whispered, refusing to cross the threshold. "I can't go near it." Lena entered, her camera rolling and EMF meter pulsing. On the bedside table, the music box sat closed and silent. But the room was a vortex of negative energy. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in a matter of seconds. A dark, wet patch was spreading across the floral wallpaper, though the ceiling was dry. "Whatever this thing is," Lena said, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and professional awe, "it's not just a residual haunting. This is a conscious, intelligent, and extremely powerful entity, and this box is its anchor." Back at Dr. Finch's study, the three of them convened. The town was tearing itself apart, and the source of the infection was now in their possession, secured in a specially insulated, lead-lined container Lena had in her car. "The folklore is fragmentary," Finch said, spreading out old maps of the Ashworth estate. "But it speaks of a compact, a covenant. The Devourer was given a vessel for its chaos, but the pact was bound by blood, the Ashworth blood." "So what does that mean?" Emily asked. "It means a simple exorcism or destroying the box might not be enough," Lena theorized. "It could just release the entity. The ritual to bind it, to sever the connection, would likely require a descendant of the original maker, of Lord Ashworth, an act of contrition from the bloodline that created the problem to begin with." "The Ashworth line was thought to have died out," Finch said, running a finger down a genealogical chart. "But there were distant cousins, a junior branch of the family. Let me see." He scribbled down names, cross-referencing with old records. After an hour of frantic searching, he found it, a single surviving name. "Henry Ashworth," he breathed. "A great-nephew of the original lord. He would be the last living heir." "Where is he?" Emily asked, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. Finch looked up, his expression grim. "According to this, he lives as a recluse, in the ruins of the old family estate on the moors, off-grid. He's been hiding from his family's name for nearly 50 years. Finding him would be the first step. Convincing him to help them would be the true trial." Part 4. The Reckoning. Chapter 9. The ruins of Blackwood Manor were a skeletal silhouette against the bruised purple sky of the moors. It was a place of desolation and sorrow. A small, modern stone cottage, almost swallowed by the encroaching wilderness, was built into what was once the manor's foundation. It was here they found Henry Ashworth. He was a man in his 70s, wiry and weather-beaten, with eyes that held a deep-seated terror. He met them at the door with a double-barreled shotgun, not with malice, but with the desperate fear of a man whose sanctuary had been breached. "I know why you're here," he rasped, his gaze flickering from Emily to Lena to Dr. Finch. "You've brought it with you. I can feel it." The air around them had grown cold, a palpable sense of dread that Henry had clearly lived with his entire life. Emily, using every ounce of her journalistic charm, explained the situation. She showed him the photo of the music box on her phone. Henry flinched as if he'd been struck. "The devil's heirloom," he whispered, the name falling from his lips like a profanity. "That's what my father called it. He told me the stories. He told me that a shadow followed our bloodline, waiting for the box to call to it. I came here to hide, to wait for it all to die out." "It's not dying out, Mr. Ashworth," Lena said, her voice firm. "It's growing stronger. It's poisoning the whole town. You are the only one who can stop it. You are the key." For the next hour, they pleaded with him. They spoke of the violence, the fear consuming Ravenswood. Dr. Finch explained the ritual from a fragmented text he'd found, a ceremony of renunciation that required the heir to offer a symbol of his own life force to seal the pact and appease the devourer. Henry looked at the faces before him, the determined journalist, the pragmatic scientist, the haunted academic. And then he looked out at the ruins of his ancestral home, a monument to a bargain made in hell. A lifetime of fear finally shattered, replaced by a grim resolve. "If this is my family's legacy," he said, his voice now steady, "then it is my responsibility to end it. Bring the box." Chapter 10. The ritual was to be performed at the heart of the old manor, in the cellar where the original pact was said to have been made. As night fell, they carried the lead-lined container to the ruins. The moment the music box was freed, the world twisted. The wind rose, carrying whispers in a language that made their teeth ache. Shadows writhed and stretched, detaching from their sources and coalescing into a single, towering form of absolute blackness at the far end of the cellar, the Devourer. Lena began a low, steady chant from the text, her voice a fragile shield against the encroaching horror. Henry stood before the music box, which had opened on its own, its melody a shriek of discordant agony that tore at their minds. He took a small silver dagger from his pocket, the same one described in Dr. Finch's text. With a steady hand, he pricked his finger. A single, perfect drop of his blood, the heirloom of his lineage, fell onto the golden filigree. The effect was instantaneous. The melody screeched to a halt. The hulking shadow of the devourer let out a silent, psychic scream of rage that buckled their knees. It surged forward, not towards them, but towards the box, drawn to the scent of the blood offering. The golden filigree flared with an unholy light, containing the entity, pulling it back into the vessel it had inhabited for so long. "Now!" Henry yelled, his face pale with effort. Emily, who had been holding a heavy masonry hammer from the car, stepped forward. With a cry that was equal parts fear and fury, she brought the hammer down on the music box. The wood splintered. The golden filigree shattered into 100 pieces. A flash of blinding, sickly green light erupted from the wreckage, and a final, piercing shriek echoed through the ruins. A sound of pure, unadulterated agony. And then, silence. The oppressive cold vanished. The shadows snapped back to their rightful places. The wind died. In the center of the cellar lay nothing but splintered wood and broken pieces of metal. The evil was gone. Part 5. The Silence. Chapter 11. The dawn broke over Ravenswood, clearer and brighter than it had in months. It was as if the town had taken a collective cleansing breath. The paranoia and aggression that had gripped the community receded, leaving behind a bewildered but peaceful populace. The brawls stopped, the suspicious glances softened. A strange collective amnesia seemed to have fallen over the worst of the events. People remembered the tension, but not the reasons why. It was like a fever had broken. Henry Ashworth, for the first time in his life, woke without the shadow of fear clinging to him. He stayed in his cottage, no longer a prisoner of his legacy, but a quiet guardian of its peace. Dr. Finch returned to his books, his understanding of history forever changed. Lena Vance packed up her equipment, finally having encountered a phenomenon that surpassed her wildest and most terrifying expectations. Emily Carter finished her article. It wasn't the fluff piece she had been assigned. It was a deeper story about the nature of community and the darkness that lies dormant in small towns. She never mentioned the music box or the Devourer. Some stories, as Mr. Blackstone had said, were best left untold. She left Ravenswood a wiser, more cautious woman. She understood now that the music box hadn't created evil, but had acted as a lens, focusing and amplifying the petty jealousies, fears, and resentments that already festered in the human heart. The devil's heirloom wasn't the object. It was the capacity for darkness itself. Epilogue. 10 years later, a young, ambitious journalist named Chloe was clearing out the desk of her predecessor, a retired legend named Emily Carter. Tucked away in a locked drawer was a leather-bound journal. Chloe, intrigued, opened it. The pages were filled with Emily's elegant, frantic script. She read, mesmerized, as the story of a cursed music box, a malevolent entity called the Devourer, and a town named Ravenswood unfolded before her. It was an incredible tale, far removed from the political scandals and corporate exposés Chloe was used to. It was a story of pure, supernatural horror. And it was, she noted with a thrill, completely undocumented. As she reached the final entry describing the destruction of the box, her fingers traced the rough texture of the page. A tiny, sharp object pricked her skin. She looked down. Embedded in the back cover of the journal was a single, tiny sliver of golden metal shaped like a miniature serpent's tongue. It must have been a stray bookmark. She pulled it free. It was beautiful, exquisite. A thought, not her own, slithered into her mind. This is the real story, the story that will make my career. As she held the sliver of golden filigree, a melody, faint and hauntingly sweet, seemed to whisper on the edge of her hearing. It was a tune she felt she knew, yet had never heard before. A tune from a locked room, waiting for a key. The devil's heirloom, it seemed, had not been so easily destroyed. It had merely been waiting, patient and timeless, for a new chronicler. And a new world to devour.